All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Today, I have the privilege of chatting with Damian Morton, and for me and Damian, we are going to be talking about the struggles of the Chicago Bears at the quarterback position. And Demo, I got to tell you like this, man. You're looking at a club that has nearly had 30, I repeat, 30 different starting quarterbacks since Jim McMahon in 1988. Why, oh, why can the Chicago Bears, a historically rich franchise, a very rich tradition on defense, especially at middle linebacker, a very rich tradition in their running game, why can they not get things figured out at the quarterback spot?
Well, you said it best, man. They're enriched at a linebacker spot. Typically, you're not gonna fix what's not broken. And then the running game has always been there, whether it's been a quarterback or a running back, for the better part of their existence. And let's just call it what it is. They're the monsters of the midweight. How you think they got that name? It's not because they're mauling offense. It was because of their mauling defense. So with that being said, I think it's just been something that's just been passed down to keep the defense thing going on, because as we know, when we were leatherheads, it wasn't that big deal to score all the time. They were more interested in the stops. It was typically always louder to cheer for the defense and be a noisemaker for offense who couldn't score than it is. They still carry that tradition today, but we know today's NFL is all about putting up points and entertaining the fans. So, I mean, we could start with that. I mean, let's talk about it. I know we mentioned it a couple of days ago when we was having a lunch break, but Bobby Douglas, man, go ahead. Just think about that. Bobby Douglas at one point was their best running back, and he was a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it. Bobby Douglas was Michael Vick before Michael Vick. I mean,
Yes,
and of
sir.
course, Michael Vick, definitely became the first quarterback to rush for 1,000 yards. And generally, when you think about it, this side of Lamar Jackson, when you have a quarterback who is rushing for that many yards, your team is not going to be good. I look at it from the Bears standpoint. They typically find quarterbacks to fit their team, but you think about it, at some point you have to make an adjustment to the modern game. And I know that Chicago has taken some quarterbacks in the first round since Jim McMahon. It hasn't worked out. Of course, Cade McNown in 1998.
Rex Grossman.
Pardon me, 1990. Rex Grossman. Of course, most recently Mitchell Trubisky. And I mean, let's not forget they actually swapped spots with San Fran to take Mitchell Trubisky. And I mean, I don't know about you. I watched Mitchell Trubisky play in college in North Carolina. I was never like really impressed by what he brought to the table. And I think what's hurting the Bears more now, when you think about the Mitchell Trubisky scenario, is the fact that okay, we saw Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes go after him in that draft. I'm not saying that Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson would be who they are if they played for the Bears. But definitely, if you're a Bear fan, you sit back and see the fact that, man, wow, you got a Super Bowl champion and an MVP and another MVP caliber quarterback, and then we're stuck with Trubisky. And then they did not extend his rookie deal. And on top of that, now the where the Bears have settled with Andy Dalton. And I mean, of course, Andy Dalton had some decent years in Cincinnati. I'm not going to write off what he did. He had some decent years. But, I mean, the fact that, we're looking at a 30-something quarterback or close to 30-something quarterback and Andy Dalton, a guy that is like, at this point in his career, maybe a stopgap guy, and you can't beat him out if you're Trubisky. I just think that, Ryan Pace, the Bears' current general manager, is not getting enough, negativity in regards to, not only taking Trubisky, but also, the lack of development that this guy has had. So, it's just very interesting. I mean, fast forwarding to the modern Bears, once again, they put a lot of stock in defense. We saw them make that big trade for Khalil Mack. They gave up multiple picks. And I mean, Khalil Mack is a legit pass rusher, but that's the only thing he can do. They drafted Roquan Smith, the middle linebacker, a few years ago. They're hoping that he could be the next guy in a long lineage of middle linebackers at that position for the Bears. You think about Dick Butkus, Mike Singletary, and of course Brian Urlacher, all three
Of
Hall of
course.
Famers,
Of
all three
course.
of the best that ever have done it at that position. But
Monsters.
I mean, for the Bears, man, they gotta, they gotta do something. Because I mean, if you look back in most recent years, their passing game is typically near the bottom of the NFL. And I know that come November and December, it gets very cold and windy in Chicago. You need to have that running game, but you still need to have that passing offense to kind of offset things. And I mean, we've seen Green Bay over the years. I know it gets cold in Lambeau as well, but they've still been able to go out there with the likes of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers and throw that football around. And of course, each of those quarterbacks was able to win a Super Bowl title for the green and gold. But if you're the Bears, you got to get with the times.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a lot of good points. I mean, a lot of great points. Before I touch on their whole division, which was the start of the NFL, anyways, how about this? So Bobby Douglas was Mike Vick before Mike Vick, but he did almost a G and less games. So he would have been
Correct.
the first 1,000-yard
Correct.
rush. I mean, given a 16-game season, he would have did it. You know what I'm saying? So
Definitely.
here's the thing, the Bears, and this is the thing that I'm harping on. The Bears have always been excited about the game manager because they're typically going to spend all their money on defense and they're going to go get that one pound and ground running back with, typical speed for the cold. And here's the problem. Let's take Green Bay, okay? Let's take Green Bay. They follow the same kind of suit. After, Bubba Franks, Mark Tremora, and Brett Favre, Dorsey Levens, what has really happened? I seen something even funnier happen. They turned a wide receiver into a running back over in Green Bay. Like,
Todd
everybody's tried to
Montgomery.
do the same thing they always done. Look at the Lions. They've always tried to find that Barry Sanders type, you know what I mean? And it's just like, your best running back, and it's no disrespect to Adrian Peterson, he was the best running back you had the last couple of seasons because you want that dude, that's got the wheels and they don't spend enough on defense. They'll go get those two guys, on defense. And it's the same thing for the rest of the guys that's been a part of the original league. They all typically follow that same manuscript that they had since the beginning of time. And it's like they went and got Mitch, and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, all them dudes in the draft, you went and got a North Carolina project that was a game manager. And he's a project because somebody was going to have to make him step his game up. You typically don't get the same kind of credibility playing for a basketball school. You know what I mean? And he's out there playing ball, so that means you're only playing against, I don't know, the leftovers who didn't go, five-star athletes out of high school to those big schools like Bama and Clemson and stuff. So, let's call it what it is. The reality. It's the reality of it all. He's a game manager. They've always been in love with a game manager. I mean, typically, look, they destroyed Jay Cutler. Like, he in Denver, he wasn't bad. Even in college, he wasn't bad. He goes there and it's like, yo, y'all literally like ran him in the dirt and made him look, whatever. And it's just because they like the game manager. Jay Cutler was a quarterback. So that's what I'm saying. He had no time to really pass. He had no time to really do anything. And you guys are relying on a running game. He's not a running quarterback. You went and got yourself a quarterback and didn't know what to do with them talent-wise around him. You try to get players, but it's like you still went and spent all your money on defense. And, okay, that's cool, but nobody wants to see 13-6 every weekend. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're barely scraping by, or your number one scorer is your nickel back from all the interceptions. So it's, unless they change those manuscripts, we kind of stuck with the same rotation because it's literally been the same rotation. And you were saying since Jim Madden days, there's been 30,
Yeah,
and you guys didn't
29.
change it yet? Come on now.
Yeah.
Come on now. You know what I'm saying? And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You look at all the story franchises, they're following the same manuscript that they've always have. Look what's happening to Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay right now. They're trying to push him out the same way they did Brett. It's the same manuscript every time. And that's why nothing's going to change for them.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Bears, and I think back to, the Bears of the 2000s with Lovie Smith, and
Whew.
I know that they didn't win a title,
They should
but
have.
in my opinion, that Chicago team left about 2 titles on the table, and I say that from the
Absolutely.
standpoint that
Absolutely.
I say it from the standpoint that they had everything except a quarterback, because you figure, you look at that D, Tommy Harris, Peanut Tillman, Lance Briggs, Brian Urlacher, just to name a few. You had arguably the best kick returner ever in Devin Hester.
Yeah.
So you figure, between your defense and your special teams, that was at least 10 points per game that they scored, not to mention how Devin Hester helped your offense, because people were afraid to kick to him. So instead of seeing a 50-yard punt, we might see a 30-yard punt that goes out of bounds.
Have to.
And not
Have to.
and then that speed on the defense. I mean, Lance Briggs, I don't think, of course, everybody focused on Urlacher, but I mean, Lance Briggs was darn good as playing sidekick, so to speak, to Brian Urlacher in his days. And of course, I mentioned a guy like Peanut Tillman, who basically perfected punching the football out to create turnovers and things like that.
Perfect.
And then you looked at you looked at the running game, from the likes of Thomas Jones to then Cedric Benson, and then of course Matt Forte. The Bears had it. They had it together, but it was just they could never get that offense figured out. And then by the time they got Jay Cutler, their defense was starting to get old. And then on top of that, they put him with Mike Martz as his offensive coordinator. Jay Cutler's style did not work with Mike Martz's style.
Saying.
I always thought that it was a marriage made in heaven with Mike Shanahan and Jay Cutler in Denver, because I really think they were perfect for one another. So it's kind of like, they did themselves a disservice. And I mean, I know that they're looking for those quote unquote blue collar quarterbacks, to fit the identity, of the city of Chicago. Of course, the city of Chicago is a city with the broad shoulders. But make no mistake about it, you still gotta, somewhat get with the times. And I mean, I know that Jim McMahon fit the identity of Chicago, but at the end of the day, if you go back to watching him play when he was at BYU, that guy was a winner. And I mean, the only difference was, you had a coach in Mike Ditka who knew how to tailor the offense somewhat around Jim McMahon. You still had Walter Payton, and Walter Payton was putting in that work. They made sure that they had just enough in their passing game, because with that D over there, with the likes of McMichael and Richard Dent, Dan Hampton, Singletary, and so many others, you weren't going to score a lot of points.
Not
and okay, in those days, you knew that, what, offensively, if you got 20 points, that's all you needed because of that D. But the thing is, and it's like, I know that the Bears are stuck in their tradition, so to speak, but you're not going to have a defense like the '85 Bears or the 2000 Ravens, coming down the pike, all the time. Those defenses are special, for a reason. So I understand, you want to focus on D, but at the same time, you have to do your due diligence on offense. And when you take a quarterback as high as they took Mitchell Trubisky, you better make sure that you got your franchise quarterback for the next 15 years. And now they're right back at square one. I mean, how much, if you're the Bears right now in 2021, how much are you going to do with Andy Dalton? I mean, it's not a lot. I mean, you have some Bears fans a couple of weeks ago that were legitimately excited because they thought they were getting Russell Wilson, and then you go from getting Russell Wilson or potentially to having to deal with Andy Dalton. It's kind of like,
player coach. It's player coach.
Yeah, what I mean? It's one of those, you think, all right, you about to take the prom queen to the prom, and you know what? You end up taking, some like third level female that everybody passed over. I hate to sound like that, but it is what it is. So that's what the Bears are. But I just think overall, and not to sound too long-winded on this, they've got to try to find to get with the times. And I know that they have their current coach, Matt Nagy, and I'm not a Matt Nagy fan. I think, he got the job based on the fact that he was an assistant coach with Andy Reid. And of course, Andy Reid has had some success as far as, developing future NFL head coaches. I don't see it in Matt Nagy. I think this is basically him and Ryan Pace trying to save their respective jobs. And I think it's too much stopgap stuff at the quarterback position instead of like trying to find a guy. And I mean, like I said, 29 different starting quarterbacks since Jim McMahon. And if you look at all of those quarterbacks they had, most of those guys really never jumped off the screen as like, okay, that's that guy, Jim Harbaugh, um, Cade McNown, Kyle Lorton, Rex Grossman, Peter Tom Willis, Steve Walsh, Eric Kramer. I mean, we could go down the list with so many guys, but none of those guys really jumped out. I was like, you know what? This is that dude. You know what? He's going to take this team to a championship. So, the Bears, they got to go out there and they got to change their strategy as an organization and realize that, you know what? Defense alone ain't going to get it done in the current NFL.
Here's the thing. Let's talk about the business side of it. So if we go back to the 80s, that team they were building, they had a coach and a running back everybody wanted to play with. You need a draw. People got to want to, let's take my Bucks, man. It was a draw. Tom Brady, everybody wanted to go. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
You need a draw. You need a draw to bring people over, and that just hasn't been there. They collected coaches and players when Urlacher and Briggs was there because everybody wanted to coach those guys or be a part of their team. Like when you're playing with dudes that are flawless, those guys were flawless at the positions. They just needed somebody to do their job, and they always had good signings then, and people wanted to play for those teams. And it just hasn't been there. It just hasn't been there. Even when Eric Kramer was playing, he had a good chance to do something, but they still didn't have enough draw to put people around him. And that's just kind of where they are. That's the difference, especially today's game. You need those draw players. People don't want to just be on a team with guys trying. When's the last time we had a team, a bunch of regulars that did something great? The closest thing we got to that recently was the rebuild Redskins, and that's still not enough. It's still not enough. To get over the top, getting there is just not good enough anymore. People want to see you make like actual pushes, and it's like with the Bears, what do you got right now? Who's the draw? Khalil Mack, he's one dimensional. He's not out there getting interceptions and breaking up passes like that. And for that matter, the defense is just in the wrong defense. They have a defense more built for like a 4-3 type system. Let Khalil be out there at right or left end and let him go crazy. He get you about 5-6 sacks a game. You let him do that. Quit running them dry by making them backpedal when his guarantee is sacks. You know what I'm saying? You're not utilizing your players enough. You got about 2 nose tackles who can make a push, but about time you get done pushing around 2 and 3 guys the whole game, fourth quarter, you're done, man. It's not like it's the fridge where I'll just lean on you and wear you out with because I'm 350. You know what I mean? It's not those days no more. So it's kind of like, if you are going to get those kind of players, at least learn how to utilize them correctly. And then you're letting go of Pro Bowl DBs instead of holding on to them and making trades for them. They're talking about they want to trade up and go get the quarterback they want. How? You're going to give all your picks for next season away? What are you going to do? You know what I'm saying? Like, what kind of package deal can you give? And it's like, Robinson, he's upset. He wants to leave. That could be something, but that means then you have to go find somebody in the draft that's going to be good. The biggest surprise in the draft for receivers has been Jefferson for the Vikings in the last couple of years. He's been like, that kid where you're just like, whoa, there's that Randy Moss type. They only come around every few years before you have to give him a couple years. He came in flashing. When are you going to find one of those guys? You need one of those at running back or wide receiver to get it going. And then, what the Bears used to be known for in the early days is always a good tight end. What happened to your tight end game? So it's just, it's a lost cause. Change the manuscript or get a draw so you can start getting real players out there, or at least get a coach that everybody wants to be around.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. The Bears, to me, you just mentioned the coaches. I've always felt like the Bears were at their best when they had a defensive minded head coach. I mean, don't get me wrong.
But isn't that what it's always been?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Ditka was not a defensive player in the NFL. He played tight end.
Exactly.
But he had a defensive mindset. You brought in Lovie Smith, and of course, the sandwich in between that, you had Dave Wannstedt, in the 90s, and Dave Wannstedt tried to bring that same mentality that he had when he was a defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys under Jimmy Johnson. But it's just like, I mean, the Bears, to me, I think they've tried to get with the times, but then they haven't brought in the right people. I mean, a guy like Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, they focus on analytics, and I think it's too much of an analytics overload in sports. We could have a whole nother show on that for a whole nother day. But you know what?
No kidding.
Again, I mean, I was never sold on Mitchell Trubisky, and you mentioned Khalil Mack. To me, regardless if you're going to do the 34 to 43, my thing is this: it's very difficult to have a pass rusher consistently get you 15, 20 sacks a game in the current NFL, the way things are structured, because number one, quarterbacks are getting the football out quicker. You're spreading out the defenses more. And then, of course, more and more rules are in place to protect the offensive players. So it kind of neutralizes what Khalil Mack can do. And especially we're already talking about a guy who's a, one-dimensional guy. And I think one of the things that has, hurt Khalil Mack, number one, you look at all the draft capital that the Bears gave up to the Raiders to get him. They still had to pay him on top of that. And then, once you start having people start comparing you to Lawrence Taylor, anytime I've seen guys like in the last 20 years or so get compared to LT, it never works out. I remember when Sean Merriman was going out there and saying he was going to be, try to be LT or be better than LT. And of course, the rest, his career was never the same after the Peds.
Not enough stunts, bro. It's not enough stunts going on.
No, it's like a lot of individuality. Guys don't know. I think it's both the players themselves as well as the coaches, as far as like knowing how to line up their guys in multiple spots on the defense. I mean, you think about, what Buddy Ryan did when he had Reggie White in Philly. You think about what Bill Belichick did when he had Lawrence Taylor with the Giants. You know what? Okay, we're not going to line you up in the same spot because we're not going to give that opposing offense an opportunity to key on you. So I think people have gotten carried away with that, and I think what happens with the Bears sometimes is when they get good players on defense, they take it for granted. It's kind of like, we got this and we're good. And listen, we talked about the Bears of the 2000s leaving a couple of titles on the table. You could make the same case for the Bears of the 1980s because that team was equipped, especially with that defense, to go out there and do their thing. And they had a nice transition from Walter Payton and Neil Anderson at running back. And of course, Neil Anderson never got the credit that he deserved because he came right after Walter Payton. But like we said before, it's the mindset of the organization. And I think what the Bears have to do, they've got to go out there and find their guy at quarterback. And they can't just sit up there, and do this whole game manager thing. And I mean, listen, for the Bears over the years, it's been hit or miss, in the first round. I remember when they drafted Curtis Enis, and of course, Curtis Enis came out of Penn State, with a lot of fanfare behind him, and it didn't work out. And we also saw a situation in 95 with Eric Kramer at quarterback where the Bears actually had two 1,000-yard receivers that year. They had Curtis Conway and Jeff Graham, and then, of course, they lost Jeff Graham in free agency to the Jets, and, he was never the same, but the Bears' offense was never the same either. So it's kind of like, it's hit or miss. I know that they want to try to find players that, identify with the city, but at the same time, you got to get a little bit more modernized.
And you're right. And the thing is, for me, like I was saying earlier, Eric Kramer had a good chance, but they went. They Jeff left. You're right. He never quite was the same. And sometimes you are drafted to the area because you're a good fit, and that was a good fit. And then Curtis Conway, he just, they pretty much didn't do nothing with the rest of the end of his career, and that wasn't fair. That they didn't get him a fair enough running game going to do that, And here's the thing. If you're not going to go find a super quarterback, remember to go get a kicker, somebody who could put up points. They got away from getting a good kicker. At one point they had went through like 6-7 kickers in one season. I'm like, bro, just get a kicker who can kick 40, 50 yards. And, if you can't do it that way, that's where Morton Anderson was for a lot of teams. He was the insurance. If you had a shaky quarterback or a new quarterback, and it's okay to go spend some money on a kicker, man. There's plenty of them, but they want to let him go to the Canadian League, stuff like that. That's still someone who puts up points. 3 add up if you keep it consistent. Janikowski kept the Raiders alive a lot of the time just because he had the big leg. Find a
Right.
kicker if you're not going to find that awesome quarterback, or find you a decent kicker until you can get to that draft where you know you can get that quarterback, or trade up for that quarterback, or give enough package deal to get it. But you're right, man. At the end of the day, the quarterback for the Bears is going to be the hurt zone, and I'm just saying, like, you can keep getting a running back, but after a while, like we know today's game, the running backs are a dime a dozen. Their career span might be 5 years these days, and at that you're on a rotation because of how the game is set up. They're getting smashed on because let me give it to him. We always want to give this young quarterback. It's been a lot of quarterback mistakes in the NFL, and that's why the running back position has changed. And they're just not making the right moves across the NFL for the Bears. Sadly, you're always going to be 28-32 when it comes to that, as far as like where your position is at. And, some of these wide receivers they had could have been big deals. They
Well,
they
not to cut you, but you remember, speaking of that, they took Kevin White in the first round of wide receiver a
I
couple
was
years
just
ago.
gonna say, like, you guys, he had all that speed, and you couldn't get someone to throw it to him. They were just like, well, he doesn't run good routes. That's not it, man. You don't have enough time to give it to a fast. He's fast. You still wasn't getting the quarterback who was releasing, or at least trusting him. That means that somewhere in practice, your game wasn't getting worked on with that. You weren't doing what they did down there in Tampa Bay, where it was constantly working with all of the wide receivers and tight end and your 7-on-7s. That shows me you weren't doing that. You could have trusted that kid. He had all that speed, man. He's a 4-2 guy and you can't get him the dang ball. Come on,
Yeah.
man.
Well, I mean, like that just comes down to an organization, and I mean, coaching as well, man. And I'll say this very quickly. You look at two guys that have been two of the best that have ever done it from a coaching position, and of course, we're talking about Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick. When you think about these guys, the first thing that comes to your mind is D. But both of these guys know that I still need to score points in order to win the game. And of course, when you think about Bill Parcells when he was with the Giants, physical offensive line, power running game. But then, he started to open it up more when he got to New England, with Drew Bledsoe.
Absolutely.
It was a good balance, when he was with the Jets and also when he was with Dallas. And, even like those first couple of championship teams with New England for Belichick, it was one of those, a lot of people, they didn't want to give Brady the credit. They were like, oh, they got that D because they had McGinnis, Bruschi, and Seymour and all those guys. But, we saw over the years how, Belichick was more open to the passing game. And of course, 2007, they were just throwing the ball all over the field with Randy Moss. And, since then, we saw Belichick go out there. He drafted Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski in the same year. They had the dynamic with the tight ends. Of course, we've seen so much that Brady did over the years with his wide receivers, the likes of Edelman, Chris Hogan, Wes
But you
Welker.
see what you said? You said he went and got two tight ends. That's the seam game. And that's what I'm saying. That the Bears got away from that. They used to have tight ends that could do this. You took away your seam game. Now, what can open up for your wide receiver?
Nothing. And it's like they're relying on wide receivers who Allen Robinson is good, but he's not on that top tier of wide receivers. And it was even a few years ago. I want to say it was
he could be no quarterback.
I can't remember the running back's name. I want to say it was either Jordan Howard or Tariq Cohen. But the thing was,
Jordan Howard.
When your running back is your best option at receiver, and he's almost leading your team in receiving, that's not a good thing. I mean, you remember in the 90s when Larry Sanders, I think, had 100 receptions one year for the Arizona Cardinals.
As a fullback.
Exactly. That's not a good thing. You ain't going to go that far. And, of course, Arizona had the worst record in the NFC East that year. So, fast forwarding it to darn near 25 years later, when you're going out there with that same mindset, it's not good. I mean, you want to have a running back coming out that could get you some receiving yards, a la Thurman Thomas or, Marshall Faulk or Roger Craig, somebody like that. But, if that's your top option, it ain't going to get it done. So that comes down to like strategy from, management, the GM. I was never sold on Ryan Pace as a general manager. I don't know how he still has a job. And again, I think that Andy Dalton move.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah, that like basically, I think the only thing that's saving the Bears from finishing in last place in that division is the fact that Detroit is there.
Yeah, and they just don't have a Gale Sayers type over there too. So it's the game don't change. It just the manuscript stays the same.
Oh, definitely, man. But looks like that's going to wrap it up for us. Big Brother D, as always, I thank you for chiming in, man. Is there any project that you're working on that you want the folks out there to check out for you?
Well, we're just getting back started after COVID. Our whole New York Underground team. This is the sports side of it, and just all the channels we got going on. I just want everybody to pay attention to everything that's going on. 300 pounds of sports is just as important. We got citywide. That's another breakdown. We got the round table. So it's just trying to get everybody back going again properly. I see this thing taking off big time too, just because this show focuses more on in-depth as opposed to overall. We got other shows that are like around the horn and stuff. So if everybody just wants to tune in to see what is going on at New York Underground, just like this show will be posted up later, check it out, tell us what you think, and that's pretty much it.
All right, big Demo, thanks again, man.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
And overall, for all you folks out there, if you like what you heard and saw tonight, just feel free to hit that like as well as that subscribe button. It definitely means a lot to you. We're working hard to bring quality content to this channel for you. You can also check me out on Twitter at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always tell you, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out,
drop
absolutely. A line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So for Damian Morton, my name is William Martin. Thanks again for tuning in to the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Thank you, and have yourselves a wonderful day.